Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Proven Strategies to Engage, Retain, and Graduate Your Students. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Kayla Burrow. I'm a member of AVID's Marketing and Webinar team, and I'll be one of your moderators. Before I turn things over to my colleague Trent Moorbutter to introduce all of our presenters, I want to go over just a little housekeeping. Number one, all participants are in listen-only mode, but we would love for you to communicate with us using the chat feature. If you don't see that on your side panel right now, just sort of hover over the presentation and a menu should appear across the bottom of your screen. And you'll want to click the icon that looks like a talk bubble. And that's going to give you the ability to drop questions in there for Q&A or let us know if you're having any issues during the presentation. And as I mentioned, Q&A is going to be at the end of our presentation, the last 10 to 15 minutes. So drop those questions in the chat. I'll collect them throughout the presentation, and we'll give those to our presenters at the end. And today's presentation is being recorded. So, get your notes in, but it's okay if you don't catch everything, and you will be able to share this with other colleagues once we're done. And that'll get to you early next week. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Trent Moorbutter, our Director on Special Assignment for AVID for Higher Education. Trent?
Hey, thanks a lot, Kayla, and welcome everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our webinar this afternoon, Proven Strategies, AVID for Higher Education. For those of you who don't know, I know many of our participants are aware and familiar with AVID and AVID for Higher Education, but for those of you who are not aware, AVID for Higher Education has been working with colleges and universities for the last decade to improve persistence and completion rates of students. We offer two different models, a student success model where we focus on retention, like I mentioned, persistence and completion of undergraduate students, as well as a teacher preparation model where we partner with universities and with education preparation programs. The student success model, which is the model we're going to focus on today, we offer a wide array of different programs and support services, but we really focus intently on engaging instruction and professional development related to engaging instruction based on AVID's Wicker strategies. Of course, you can see on the slide there we have first year and transition courses, Socratic tutoring models, career and guided pathways, developmental education, career and technical education, adult education and literacy. And again, a wide array of different, programs and support services that we offer and partner and collaborate with colleges and universities. The teacher preparation model, as I mentioned briefly earlier, we work with universities that have teacher education programs. We provide faculty development, Wicker strategies for teacher candidates, support with AVID tutoring, and as well as field practice with Wicker. Today, it is again my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters. We're joined by our friends from Butler Community College, Dr. Phil Sperry and Ms. Shannon Covert, as well as our friends from Texas Wesleyan University, Ms. Michael A. Brown and Mr. Joe Brown. And we say proven strategies to retain and help students complete because we're also being joined today with Mr. Joseph Shields. He's the Director of Evaluation for Gibson's Consulting Group, who is the lead researcher with regard to Michael and Susan Dell Foundation research study looking very closely at the impact of AVID for Higher Education strategies implementation. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our friends from Butler.
All right. Welcome. And good afternoon. I'm Phil Sperry, and I'm the Dean, one of the co-liaisons for our AVID effort here at Butler Community College. And with me is Shannon Covert, who is my co-liaison. This slide gives you some background information on Butler Community College. We're located in south central Kansas, just outside Wichita. And even though technically we're classified as an essentially rural school, the majority of our population comes from the Wichita area. And so really most of our students are from an urban or a suburban background. We also are very typical in terms that we have a very large student population that needs a good deal of remediation in terms of not being quite prepared for the college experience. And that was one of the issues that we were trying to address as we began to participate in AVID. We had been involved with the League for Innovation for Community Colleges, and since about 2005, we had been involved with the SESI study of student engagement that you might be familiar with, or at the university level, the NESI studies of student engagement. So we knew we wanted to do a lot more, recognizing that research demonstrates that student engagement highly advances student learning, and we had done a lot of effort in that area, but we really didn't have any kind of mechanism that would energize and focus our efforts. So when we had the opportunity to enter into this AVID study and become an AVID school, we were somewhat familiar with it because the Wichita Public School System is very strongly engaged in AVID and has even a couple of demonstrator schools. But when we were offered the possibility of entering into AVID, we saw this as an excellent possibility to get connected with strong resources to help our faculty develop their understanding and their practical use of engagement strategies, and to advance a number of our initiatives, particularly trying to address the needs of our developmental ed students. So here you see a series of initiatives that we started in around 2013 when we became an AVID school. We had had a long tradition of faculty development, but we got a new faculty development director in the fall of 2014, and he plugged into the whole AVID process, which helped facilitate what he was trying to accomplish enormously, and also helped us get to addressing a lot of those targets we had in terms of improving our student engagement. The next bullet on this list, ALP, is the Advanced Learning Project. You might be familiar with it from efforts on the East Coast, particularly in Maryland. That's an accelerated learning program for students that are entering into college below a Comp 1 level. So it's a co-requisite program where students take both Comp 1 and an auxiliary course with the same faculty person. All of those people became AVID trained, and so that's helped that program enormously. Shannon, who is with me, was very involved in this math redesign that's mentioned here, where college algebra and the classes that lead up to it were broken down into 5-week modules that can be stacked, and that uses an engagement process that's handled through Hawks online, and that helps students get into the college level work a lot more readily. This year, for the past couple of years, we've been working on this, but this year we've become a guided pathway school. That process has been thoroughly AVIDized, and I'll be telling you more about that. An outstanding thing that we were able to do with the resources that are available to us from the AVID consulting staff, in 2016, we did a full administrative retreat that introduced and developed for Butler the concept of using guided pathways. But the entire 2-day retreat used AVID strategies, so people that weren't yet familiar with the AVID strategies could become, on a practical basis, familiar with how they worked, what they produced in terms of learning and decision-making, and how they would benefit our general administrative processes. I'm trying to get this thing to advance, sorry. There we go. This slide gives you an overview of our faculty development. I would say that our faculty development is kind of a linchpin in terms of the success we've had with AVID. Our faculty development director has had a great deal of ongoing interaction with AVID staff, and now we're at the place where many of our own faculty are able to really productively conduct workshops that advance AVID techniques. So we have had 152 faculty who have completed what we call our Summer Jam program. It's a week-long intensive program in AVID strategies that helps a faculty person right at the end of the spring term plan for the next year, and even take time to develop lesson plans that have been thoroughly AVIDized. Now, to talk about our freshman seminar class, which is the focus of what's been going on in the study that Joseph's going to talk to you about. We started in 2014 with a course that was called LS 150, Engaging Higher Education. This class was a class that incoming freshmen could take on an entirely voluntary basis. It would introduce them to Wicker. It would give them an orientation to the college resources that were available to them. And it would also introduce them to the rationale behind the general ed learning outcomes that Butler advances. That class, like I say, was entirely volunteer, and we discovered that generally the students that were willing to enroll in it had already had an AVID experience in high school. And so it didn't really reap us the full benefit because we were exposing students to AVID strategies who had already participated in them. So then we moved to trying to address our need for the Dev Ed advancement. We moved to a course called PD 120, Conquering College, a 3-credit-hour course, where the course was customized to meet the needs of those Dev Ed students and to take the place of our traditional, not really highly engaging study skill class. So now we have moved to a class that's called we refer to them as a group as PDX, engaging in, and they are custom designed for each of our pathways, our meta-major groupings of pathways. So we have 8 versions of this course. It's a 1-credit-hour course. There is one for each meta-major, and it is a required part of the pathway curriculum. So essentially, all of our incoming freshmen have this experience, where immediately they're met with a teacher who is familiar with the kind of discipline cluster of their meta-major pathway area that they're going to major in. So this course can introduce them to high engagement learning strategies, but it also helps them focus their decisions in terms of what they intend to study while they are a student at the community college. We've only had one full semester of this with full implementation, but we've already got pretty promising results. There were 944 students that enrolled in one of the 8 versions of this course. 90% of those students completed the course. And 74% of those students that took this course then persisted to the spring semester here at Butler, which is significantly higher than students that were not enrolled in the class for whatever reason. 71% of the students completed with C or better, and 88% of those students are enrolled in the spring term. So that's a lot higher persistence level than we were experiencing with students beforehand. This gives you a course description for the business and industry version of it. Like I said, this course, it focuses on career choices, the rationale behind the curriculum that a student will be studying in an area. It also helps them understand how to access college resources. It also plugs them into a mentoring process that we're setting up at Butler and have begun to implement, where students are engaged with an advisor, the department chair for the pathway, and then also, well, we have a milestone course, which is their principal course in the pathway for that semester, and then that first semester with their PDX instructor, so that they have a network of support from the very beginning of their college experience. I think that gives a pretty good overview of what we have done at Butler with the excellent resources from AVID, and I'm going to pass it on to the good people at Texas Wesleyan.
With no relationship, we just have plain names. But a little about Texas Wesleyan. We are the oldest level educational institute in Tarrant County in Fort Worth, founded in 1890, private Methodist-affiliated liberal arts university. We have about 1,900 undergraduate students and approximately 1,900 graduate students here. Our student profile is really a first-generation student, lower income, middle income background, so they do often qualify for quite a bit of federal financial aid. In the fall of 2018, we had a freshman class of 270. And we are, I've been told, to build for a freshman class of 330 for this next fall. And we were very fortunate. We joined AVID for Higher Education in the spring of 2014. And I think it was rather serendipitous. One of our faculty who had been at Texas Women's was the AVID for Higher Education coordinator there and was teaching at Wesleyan now, and came and said, why don't you come over to an institute in Dallas? I think they're doing something there that Wesleyan would be interested in. And we went. I had the pleasure of meeting with Betty Crone, and we discovered that they had a Dell grant, and it just seemed that Texas Wesleyan would be a really good fit for the intent of what the Dell grant would be. And the reason was, as the slide shows, we've had kind of a first-year experience class in various versions for over 25 years in different methods of experiencing it. And here, all freshmen are required to take ACE, Academic Success Experience 1111, and it is a one-credit class that meets twice a week. We had a very strong student and freshman advising center, which Michael Brown is director there. We had strong student support there with tutors. We had a great administration that was very supportive of the work we were doing and excited about becoming involved in AHE. And here in Tarrant County, AVID is a very strong foundation in the schools, and our admissions office often brings AVID students to campus for the campus tours. So it just seemed like it was such a natural. But I think part of what makes us a little more unique in our first year experience is our classes are taught mainly by full-time faculty or our administrative professional staff that have masters. The faculty that teach with me and for me come from athletic training, exercise science, biology, business, criminal justice, English, psychology, religion, sociology, theater. The faculty that teach often will recommend someone they feel would be great to join our team, and they're invited to come on board. So it's faculty that really enjoy working with freshmen and want to be there to help get them transplanted and succeed. We also have a Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, our CETL, and so that was there, and we got them involved with this. And our faculty had already had really strong experiences in high engagement practice because of a Title III grant where we focused on learning communities and had in the summer week-long training sections for high engagement student-centered learning. So those faculty that were joining learning communities are also the same faculty. We all have them that are always happy to promote and work with people and engage our students. And as I said, our ACE credit is one credit course that meets twice a week. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to talk about her collegiality and what we do here at Wesleyan.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Brown. I oversee advising in the Academic Success Center at Texas Wesleyan. And like Joe was saying, when I think our slides went a little too far.
No.
Okay. So when AVID came to Texas Wesleyan, we had to establish where on campus we were going to have the AVID Center, and we decided the Academic Success Center was a perfect fit. So we made the Academic Success Center AVIDized, which meant training the student tutors using the AVID Socratic method, which was brand new for us. Our tutors weren't really used to that method, and we found it to be really successful, and we continue to use this. In fact, our director of the Success Center is now the trainer for all of the tutors, and they have to do this every semester before they're allowed to work for us. And at first, we were a little worried about how this was going to work with our students because it was a total transition in how we used to provide tutoring, but we were very happy to find that students, they loved it, and we noticed a drop in tutoring appointments. And turns out when we did some focus groups, we realized that's because our students were becoming less tutor dependent. Using that Socratic method in the Success Center was helping them solve problems on their own. So that was great. We also used AVID terminology and the Wicker strategies in the ACE courses. We used them more in the Success Center so that students would hear them and get more used to them. Also, a lot of our freshmen came from AVID high school, so they were familiar with that terminology. So we hoped it would make them feel more comfortable. Faculty workshops that were sponsored by AVID for Higher Education were held on campus through the CEDL. We even were lucky enough to have Joe Cusio come and lead one of those. We've had some great facilitators come in to work with all of our faculty. Also with the Dell Grant, the ACE sections, like Joe was saying, the ones that we made AVID sections, we used more experienced senior faculty to lead those sections, because these faculty are the ones that had had the previous high engagement training that Joe mentioned. So it made sense to them. They were used to it, and they were able to adopt these strategies very easily. They also attended the Summer Institute, where they got to practice those strategies hands-on and see what other schools were doing so that we could do it better and better. And the results that of the Gibson survey that Joseph's going to talk about more showed significant differences between those AVIDized ACE sections and the traditional ones, which we were pleasantly surprised by. Like Joe said at the beginning, we knew we were already using high engagement. Joe even mentioned, are we going to see any differences at Wesleyan, because we're doing so many of these things. And in fact, doing formal AVID, implementing it the way that we were taught did make a big impact.
And another part of this was within those AVID sections for the grant, those students we tried to mainly have as need-based, Pell-based students for part of the grant request to see how that would link within these strategies.
And now being in our 5th year, all the ACE sections are using AVID and Wicker. We want to continue educating faculty, new faculty that come to Wesleyan, as well as faculty who just haven't been trained yet. We want all of them to, especially those that are teaching in the general core, we want them to all be using the AVID strategies and going to the AVID professional development through the CEDL. And one of our big goals was to reinstate learning communities and use AVID to do this by linking the AVIDized ACE sections, which is all of them now, with one of our core classes with faculty that are using the same AVID strategies. And we were able to do that last fall and some this semester. So we're excited to see the outcomes from doing that.
With Wesleyan having about 1,900 undergraduate students, only about 550 live on campus. And those are usually our athletes, our fine arts type of students, and our student leadership group. But we also had the opportunity for a 2-day workshop sponsored by AHE to work with our student life staff, the Dean of Students, Dean of Residence Halls, Dean of Student Engagement, and the head residents of the campus residence halls, to just show how they could take AVID and Wicker strategies to bring in and use within their student life population for residential students. With that, I want to hand over to Joseph Shields with Gibson and Associates.
Okay, hello. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope so. I first want to thank the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation for their support of this project, because as researchers, it's not often that we get to study 3 different cohorts of students for 5 years, with the first cohort studied all the way through graduation. So it's an unusual study design, and we're appreciative for that. Secondly, I'd like to thank the AVID Center for being a client that actually wants to know if AHE is working, and if it's not working, and why is it not working, or why is it working. So the study was designed to collect a lot of both formative and summative information. And then I'd like to thank each of the institutions that allowed us to come on campus for their engagement and hospitality during our site visits, and then also for the big lift in providing a lot of data to us to analyze over time. And it's been really great listening to Texas Wesleyan and Butler talk about their programs, because I remember the first year we came to Texas Wesleyan, I remember Joe telling us, well, we're probably not going to be able to see much difference because we already have a pretty good first-year experience course in place. I'm like, all right, well, let's see. That's going to be an empirical question for us. And then secondly, when I went to Butler the first year, you know, we saw beginnings of implementation, but it's been really fun to see that program take off in the second and third years and beyond. For instance, Yeah, I think this program is interesting because it's not like you can flip a switch and then all of a sudden lecturers become great facilitators in the classroom. It takes time, and the effectiveness of that takes time. So I saw faculty at Butler go from being pretty good lecturers and trying a couple of strategies here and there to becoming fantastic facilitators of teaching and learning in the classroom. So that's been really great to see. And so what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give a really quick study overview. I'm not going to go into the gory details of the methodology of everything because we want to cut to the results, which talk about the perceived impact of the AVID professional development, differences in instructional practices between faculty who are trained and not trained, and then the student perspectives. And then lastly, talk about the relationship between AHE participation and student persistence. And then I'll finish with a few concluding observations. Okay, the primary intervention that we studied was the impact of student participation in a targeted, typically a first-year experience course. And we conducted site visits, interviews, focus groups at 9 different participating institutions in 7 states. And we looked at persistence and course passing rates, and analyzed cohorts, as I mentioned, for 3 cohorts over 5 years. And these are the 9 institutions that participated. We had 6 4-year institutions and 3 2-year colleges. And what's important to note here is the diversity in the types of colleges from a geographic standpoint, as well as a student diversity standpoint. So what that shows is when implemented correctly, AVID can work at a wide variety of institutions. And just as I mentioned in terms of data sources, we did interviews, focus groups, and observations in fall 14, 15, and 16. We conducted student surveys and faculty surveys in all 3 of those years, and we collected a mountain of student-level data to run our statistical models to see what the effect or impact of AVID participation was on student outcomes. So first, let's look at the perceived impact of the AVID professional development. Through interviews, we found campus leaders, even if they already felt they had a pretty good communication pathway between their departments, almost universally across the 9 institutions felt that AVID for Higher Ed improved student success communications and gave them a common language for student affairs and academic affairs and other departments to talk about how to improve student outcomes at their institutions. And then over 2/3 of the AVID liaisons and college administrators who attended AVID professional development agreed that that the participation resulted in more frequent use of information and strategies that they learned from the PD sessions. It helped them to develop strategies to increase collaboration across academic affairs and student affairs, which historically had been a sticking point at some colleges. And helped them better align student services to create institutional infrastructure. And then lastly, improve their ability to implement strategies to facilitate change. So from an administration standpoint, the professional development helped them figure out how to work with AVID for Higher Ed at their campus to make where it made sense. And this is results from faculty surveys. And across the board, faculty had indicated that they were, after attending professional development, they were more confident implementing strategies. They attempted more than one strategy. They were able to implement AVID writing strategies into their classes that they might not have been doing as much before. And this is interesting because most of these faculty had indicated that these were not new approaches to them. But after attending the professional development, they became more top of mind, and they implemented them in their classrooms at a more frequent rate. And then, so this is in each of the 3 years, 14-15, 15-16, and 16-17, between 66 and 68% of faculty indicated that they used AVID strategies either somewhat or much more frequently after training. And those percentages are split almost evenly between somewhat and much more frequently. So we're seeing the training changing instructional practices in the classroom, at least from the faculty perspective. But we wanted to get another perspective. So we observed over 100 classrooms, some split between AVID classrooms and non-AVID classrooms. And what we saw was writing activities, reflective quick writes, things that made students think about the content in the class and write about it, was happening in 62% of the AVID classrooms versus only 33% of the non-AVID classrooms. And similarly, small group activities we observed in 79% of the AVID classrooms, but only 48% of the non-AVID classrooms. So the faculty are telling us something is changing. We observe the classrooms and we see something is different. Now we wanted to get the student perspective. And so we did surveys of students in each of the three, for each of the 3 cohorts, fall 2014, 15, and 16. And the combined results show substantially more AVID classrooms using small group activities. Students are being encouraged to go to the tutoring center more often in AVID classrooms. Note-taking strategies are emphasized much more in AVID classrooms. Students in those classrooms are more familiar with those active and collaborative learning strategies. So they know the terminology and they understand that it's not lecture, it's more collaborative work. Test-taking strategies were emphasized much more in AVID classrooms, and critical thinking and inquiry were also. But these numbers, I want you to keep in mind that this is across all 9 institutions. When we look at some of our higher implementing institutions in terms of implementation fidelity, such as Texas Wesleyan and Butler, those percentages are even larger differences between the AVID and the non-AVID. And this really surprised Joe and his team at Texas Wesleyan. And as Phil and Shannon talked about, at Butler, their program has progressed, and we're seeing the biggest differences between AVID and non-AVID in their fall 2016 cohort, the last cohort we studied. So we're seeing good results across the board, but even stronger results at Texas Wesleyan and Butler and some of the other higher implementers. Now, the student perspective. So after controlling for student differences, we wanted to find out what is the relationship between a student being exposed to a lot of active and collaborative learning, high engagement strategies, and how they felt the course improved their skills, and how they interacted with university resources. And what we found was when there were higher levels of high engagement strategies and skill building activities, and skill building activities could be note taking, it can be test taking skills, any number of maybe non-academic skills that help to improve their academics. When those were used at a higher rate, students were more likely, significantly more likely to feel that the course improved their skills and confidence that they'd be successful in college, and it improved their willingness to access university resources, attend campus events, and very importantly, participate in peer study groups. And the reason why I say that's important is everything about persistence isn't necessarily academic. Some of it's social, some of it's understanding, and getting an opportunity to meet other classmates. And that's particularly true on commuter campuses and in other schools where students are coming and going. So what we saw was that in AVID classrooms, there was a substantially larger proportion of students that were saying they were willing to engage in peer study groups or even organize them. so students in courses taught by AVID trained faculty were also consistently more likely to note improvements in note-taking skills and use those note-taking skills in other courses, be less anxious about exams, think more critically about issues, organize peer study groups, and participate in peer study groups. And as I mentioned earlier, the percentages for Texas Wesleyan, Butler, and some other colleges that really focused in on the teaching and learning part of this project saw fairly large differences between their treatment and control groups. And then lastly, we wanted to look at the relationship between a student being in a course, in a first-year seminar course or targeted course taught by an AVID trained faculty member compared to similar students in courses taught by non-trained faculty. And so we used propensity score matching to find students that looked as similar as possible. And then regression adjusted the effects to make sure that to even tighten the estimates better. So what I'm going to show you are adjusted scores, adjusted persistence rates based on the differences in the two groups, those in AVID and those not in AVID. So it's an apples to apples comparison. And what we saw was we analyzed the data at the institution level. So models were run for each of the 9 institutions and for each of the 3 cohorts. So there's a possibility of, like for the freshman, fall to spring and the year 1 to 2, for there to have been 27 instances where we ran the models. But there were some cases where either data wasn't available or there was a problem with the comparison group that they couldn't be included in the analysis. So in the freshman, fall to spring, we had 72% of the instances produced positive effect sizes of AVID program participation on persistence. In year 1 to year 2, it was 77%. And about 25 to 29% in those first 2 groups were statistically significant. So the differences were fairly large. Again, year 1 to year 3, 77% of the effect estimates were positive. Year 1 to year 4, 88%. And all of the 4 estimates were positive in the year 1 to year 5, which also included degree completion. And just to give you a sense of how large the differences in persistence were for AVID versus non-AVID students, for year 1 to year 2 persistence, freshman to sophomore, 58% of the institution level calculations yielded effects of 5 percentage points or more. In year 1 to year 3, 46% yielded effect sizes of 5 percentage points or more. And that's important because it's important for the students in terms of their own, matriculation across their college career, but it's also important for the institutions in terms of revenue and tuition and keeping their students that they already have at the school. And now I want to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the information that we have collected for Butler Community College and Texas Wesleyan. So we calculated freshman, fall to spring, and first to second year persistence for their fall 2015 cohort. And as you can see, in the first year it was fairly flat, but first to second year, the AVID versus the non-AVID group was 61% versus 44%. And these, again, are regression-adjusted percentages, which control for differences in the 2 groups as best as possible based on the data available. And the fall 2016 cohort realized a substantive difference between AVID and non-AVID in the freshman, fall to spring, 91 versus 77%, which is a fairly large difference. And 52 versus 46%. So we see those gains still at 6% from freshman to sophomore persistence at Butler for the fall 2016 cohort, which was the 3rd year of their program development. And now for Texas Wesleyan students, the fall 2014 cohort, again, a lot of times in the fall to spring, we didn't tend to see big differences. Most of the students tended to come back. But where students started to drop out, they were dropping out at higher rates for the non-AVID students than the AVID students. And the first to fifth year persistence at Texas Wesleyan, and this does include students that achieved their four-year degree, achieved their bachelor's degree in 4 years. So there was a 52% to 34% difference in the final calculation from first to fifth year at Texas Wesleyan for the very first cohort of students. The second cohort, and the difference in actual graduation rates for that fall 2014 cohort was a 12 percentage point difference, 32% for AVID versus 20% for non-AVID, which is very promising. The fall 2015 cohort, we see comparable results, but even a little bit more positive, and the effect size is more profound than the first cohort. So while the study is concluding now, it'd be very interesting to follow that second cohort into graduation to see if we see that same expansion of difference between AVID and non-AVID. But consistently, a 5 to 7 point difference in the AVID versus non-AVID students. And then lastly, in the fall 2016 cohort, by the first to third year, we see a 7 point difference. So again, it's the trajectory of the long-term effect of being in those AVID sections as a freshman seems to be, has some legs and longevity there. Now, just to wrap things up a little bit. So first of all, the first thing we looked at was the effect of AVID professional development. And by all accounts, it was of high quality and seemed to have an impact on faculty instructional practices. And then we saw that the exposure to student-centered instructional practices and the skill-based content around note-taking, around test-taking skills, was associated with higher levels of student confidence and increased likelihood that those students would access university resources, participate in peer study groups, go to office hours. One of the things that came out in both interviews and focus groups was the fact that the faculty members were more accessible. Like, there wasn't this barrier of lecturer to student. Instead, they were around, they were facilitating, they were talking about the student's life in and out of class. They were creating, unique discussions in class, and so that made them more accessible. Secondly, enrollment in infused freshman seminar or first-year experience courses was associated with higher levels of student persistence in college. And as I mentioned, that's great for students and that's great for colleges. And the AHE program can be effective in a wide array of colleges and universities. We're seeing, like Joe said, a small private college in Fort Worth, and Butler's situation, somewhat of a rural college of about 8,800 in Kansas. We see it working in North Carolina at a state school. We see it working in a numerous different places. But the most important thing is implementation fidelity matters. And when schools are all in, we tend to see results. When that's not the case, some of those results can be mixed. So, as I mentioned, implementation fidelity matters. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joseph, and all of our presenters. Such great information. And I encourage everyone to keep dropping your questions for us in the chat. I'll keep my eye on that throughout the Q&A portion of our presentation. And I do have some questions ready to go. So presenters, just make sure you unmute yourself before you start answering. The first question we had come in is for our Butler folks. Do the Butler faculty get paid for the week-long trainings that you described? If so, how do you get the funding for a large number of faculty? If not, how do you get so many to participate?
They do not exactly get paid directly. There is an incentive program which they can commit to where they have then a responsibility during the coming school year to participate in what are called huddle groups, where they interact in terms of what's working and what's not working as well in class. They also are obligated to document what they're doing. So there is a financial incentive tied to it, but it's not, they don't exactly directly get paid for that week experience. And so not everyone that participates, there are classes of about 40 to 45 in that week-long intensive training, and perhaps maybe half of them have taken the incentive and the other half are just doing it for professional development. So yes and no.
Excellent, thank you. We had another question for our Texas Wesleyan folks. What percentage of students are you reaching in your ACE sections?
I'm not sure if I understand the question on that percentage of students we're reaching in our ACE section. It's all freshmen have to take ACE. And then actually, if they don't do well their first semester and make less than a 2-point, they go into a secondary class that we call RAM Rebound, because RAM's our mascot, where they are really kind of getting back on track academically. And again, it's using AVID strategies and Wicker strategies within there. So I'm not sure about the question on percentage. I mean, retention, if it's a retention number, our freshman retention, we'd like to be higher. It's about 63%.
Awesome. We'll see if that person drops any follow-up questions for us. The next question, Trent, you might be the best to answer this, or Dr. Betty Crone, our Director of AHE, is also on the line with us today. Are there any online courses or website using AVID for higher education strategies? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, for those of you who don't know, I actually have joined AVID for Higher Education after spending 7 years as the Vice President for Instruction at Nash Community College here in North Carolina. And at Nash, we implemented a very robust online program and implemented Wicker strategies into the online environment. And as a result of that, actually saw a dramatic increase in retention and success in students in the online environment. That being said, AVID for Higher Education is also offering online professional development, developing for implementation online professional development. And in fact, we'll be offering presenting a free webinar here in the next month and a half. I think we've got tentatively scheduled for June the 14th. If you want to pencil that in on your calendar, where we will actually be sharing some of those online Wicker strategies. Dr. Crone, if you want to jump in.
I'm very excited about the work we're expanding into the online learning section, and our colleges are responding very well with that as well. We're rolling out some face-to-face training with their digital devices so they can actually look at how to integrate this into their online courses. And then we are also going to be creating some asynchronous courses that can be done by faculty as well.
Excellent.
I see. This is
Joseph.
Yeah, I see a question about, there was a question about the N in one of the graphs that showed, and that was the percentage of cases in which there was a positive effect size. The N represents the number of institutions and cohort for that analysis was conducted on. Typically, the size of the AVID and the non-AVID groups ranged anywhere from about 100 to 150 at an institution to close to 1,000. So there were some institutions had relatively small cohorts that required oftentimes larger effect sizes for it to be statistically significant, but that N did not reflect the number of students, but rather the number of times we ran the regression models to calculate freshman, fall to spring, first to second year, second to third year, if that makes sense.
Excellent. Thanks for clarifying that for us, Joseph. And the next question is another data question, so stay on the line. Do the community colleges have data on part-time students as well as on full-time students? Where this person teaches, 75 to 80% of the students are part-time, so they're not necessarily going to achieve four-year graduation rate.
That's a great question. We only calculate, for two-year institutions, we only calculated first to second year persistence, as well as whether or not that a student had received their certificate or two-year degree within a three-year time frame. So in our analysis of persistence to first and second year, that includes both full-time students as well as part-time students. And in the final report, we're also going to be looking at transfer rates from 2 to 4 year institutions.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question is a little more general for folks. Are there specific AVID strategies that you found most impactful on your campus?
This is Phil from Butler. I would say, something as simple as the 10-2 approach to presenting information through lecturing, combining that with strategies like quick writes has been very effective. Very central to the impact that our freshman class has on students is a reading cycle that's based on the strategies that AVID teaches in terms of helping students pre-read, what to do during the actual reading process, and then how to respond to the reading afterwards. I know that's made a tremendous amount of difference, not just in our freshman classes, but particularly in a lot of the humanities, social, and behavioral science classes. So those are things I'd highlight.
This is Joe Brown at Texas Wesleyan. Part of this comes from our training when we were doing learning communities. The 10-2 basically if you're doing a more traditional lecture style, which we try to not do, but the 10-2 to lecture and then stop with an activity. And the activities, there's a whole roster from within the AVID workbook, but we also like to do a lot of quick writes just to have them write something down, pass it around, someone else read it, and see who's understanding what. And we also do a lot of pair share to see how they process the information that's been given to them during the break, kind of thing on a 10-2. 10 minutes of lecture, 2 minutes of processing in active learning.
And like I mentioned with the tutors, the AVID Socratic training that the tutors have done and applied in their sessions has had an impact we didn't expect. Like I said, students, the demand for tutoring appointments has increased overall as far as more students coming in, but students having to come in as often has decreased because they're more empowered to problem solve on their own. We thought that was pretty cool.
And thinking about the different institutions that we observed over the course of the study, I agree that I think any time strategies were used to get students talking to students in a meaningful peer sharing way, that was great. And interestingly, I think one of the things that probably the students liked the least was the note-taking strategies, but it might have been one of the things in the survey that was revealed that was possibly most impactful for them, because so many students start college without having a good understanding of knowing what to write down, what not to write down, how to take notes, how to structure those notes, how to use those notes afterward. But I think that's also a really impactful strategy that's maybe not the most liked, but pretty impactful.
It's sort of like vegetables. You need them, but they're not always the most fun thing to eat on your plate. That's what I used to tell my AVID students. Speaking of AVID students and AVID at different levels, would anyone like to speak about how AVID for higher education is different from what people often think about when they hear the word AVID, which kind of leads back to high school elective classes and things like that.
I'll take the ball on the first toss on that. I mean, our profile of a student at Wesleyan is predominantly first to go to school, high risk. So the other reason we liked it was AVID in the lower education was to identify students and help them get to complete graduation. So it's a natural for AVID for higher education to take a high risk student and show them and give them the tools to show that they can graduate as well too. So the difference is, well, we learned whether in note taking, whether we prefer to call it focus notes. We're not going to call it Cornell notes. We're not going to call it AVID notes. We're going to call it focus notes on how to write to prepare focus. And we discovered that they liked that vegetable a little better to eat than if we called it the other way. And that's just interesting. I don't know what's going on in the high school with that, but I think because of the freedom they had to do more group work and probably the way it's taught by the faculty here with maybe a little less formality, I hadn't thought about that before. It's the same strategies. It's just that we are probably not as rigid a classroom situation in college as what they're coming from in high school. Plus, a lot of our faculty use a lot of technology within phone technology to have high engagement where the students are using their phones to learn instead of check their latest Facebook or text.
I would say for Butler that I often am asked to talk to local middle school and high school students that are AVID students about transitioning to the college experience. One of the biggest differences is at that level, it's a much more select, contained group of students who are very specifically nurtured. When they ask what does it take to be an AVID student at Butler, I say you enroll. Mm-hmm. It's intended to be perhaps more pervasive across the culture through all the different disciplines. I mean, we've been working in terms of integrating it into career and tech ed type instruction and that sort of thing. So that's a strong sense where it's different in higher education than it may be at the secondary level.
That's a great point, Phil. Having spent the last number of years at a community college, it's not uncommon for a community college class to have 14, 15, 16-year-old early college or dual enrollment students. At the same time, you might have 60, 70-year-old students who have been, recently unemployed, and they're back at the college trying to get some training. Someone mentioned in a question earlier about part-time and full-time students. So that at a college, in a college environment, the diversity of the students is just so broad compared to that contained AVID elective class that might exist in a high school. So, Kayla, when we talk about, what AVID looks like on a college campus versus what it looks like on a high school campus, I think Phil hit the nail on the head with that, in that it's more pervasive. It's more about meeting the need of every single student on the campus. It's about providing faculty with the tools, resources, support, strategies, so that they can make those connections beyond the content. Colleges and universities hire faculty based on their content, not necessarily because they're skilled at pedagogy, and so the AVID strategies are there to help support them with delivering the content in meaningful ways, interactive and engaging ways across any content area, and that's one of the important, significant differences.
And I would also add one last point to kind of thinking about it from a more global level. I think the flexibility with which AVID for Higher Ed is implemented across the campuses is really important to make sure that it's meeting the needs of each of the particular schools. Because it's not like a high school program where you can put it on any campus and it looks the same. At the higher ed level, it needs to look different, and it allows administrators to be able to use it in a way that helps their students become successful.
That's excellent. We've got about a minute left. I wanted to make sure I put our contact information up here and say don't be a stranger. Feel free to communicate with us. And as I said, we'll get this recording out to you early next week. But before we say bye, I wanted to offer up one more question to our panelists, and that is, and Trent, since you're a former AVID for higher ed educator, you can answer this as well. What's been the biggest change on your campus since you brought in AVID for higher education?
I mean, I can say briefly that AVID helped at Nash Community College while I was there. AVID helped us create a common instructional language and a common instructional framework. It helped our entire campus shift our mindset, knowing that college is difficult, and college is supposed to be difficult, but getting to and having access to and being successful, moving from class to class and understanding and being able to navigate, that was one of those unintentional or unintended really positive consequences. It helped the faculty at Nash Community College and the staff really understand and build relationships, understand who the students were and build really strong relationships with them. So we stopped having conversations about students being lazy and unmotivated and started having a lot more conversations about what we can do to help build bridges to their barriers and help them be successful academically, socially, emotionally. And when we put all those pieces of the puzzle together, students were being retained at a much higher level and graduating at a much higher level as well.
Anybody else want to mention the biggest change on their campus since AHE came in?
At Wesleyan, I think where we see a significant change would again be within what Michael Brown area for tutoring and the Socratic method and the strength of what had happened for consistency in the tutoring center and students having the confidence to not necessarily come back as much. And there was also just a consistent vocabulary of terms that were adapted from AVID, Wicker, I mean, whichever way you want to go with that, within all ACE sections, and that was now filtering into our core classes in English, in history, in speech, in some of the social sciences, as we get more and more of our core faculty going to summer institutes, so that we're all kind of on the same language when we're using high engagement strategies in any class.
For Butler, I would say that I agree very much with the two effects that have been talked about, but underlying that was a tremendous greater commitment and enthusiasm on the part of faculty. As has been mentioned earlier, oftentimes at the post-secondary level, they don't know a lot initially about teaching. They know a tremendous amount about their subject area, a much greater enthusiasm to learn about teaching and to put that into practice. I've seen that happen over the past 5 years.
That's so wonderful to hear. Thank you all so much for such a great presentation. Thank you to everyone listening out there, whether you're live or you're listening to the recording. We appreciate your time so much. And just thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day and a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, everybody.